Okay, good morning, Your Lordships. Dear students, today we are going to understand what is law and how many sources of law are there in our country. You must have studied in legal methods that there are mainly three sources of law. And these three sources of law are number one, legislation, that is, law made by the parliament and state legislatures. Second source of law is judicial precedents, and third source of law is custom. Today in this lecture, we are mainly concerned with judicial precedent as a source of law. What is judicial precedent? A judicial precedent is a judgment of a court of law which is cited as an authority to decide a similar set of facts and which can be used by the courts as a source for future decision making. Only such decisions as lay down some new principles are called judicial precedents. So, dear students, judicial precedent is a source of law where past decisions create law for judges to refer back to for guidance in future cases. Suppose a case is decided by the Supreme Court of India. This judgment becomes a source of law for the future generation of judges. They will follow the decision given by the Supreme Court. And within the territory of India, we have various hierarchy of courts, and every court is bound by the previous decisions made by the courts higher than them. So, judicial precedents or decisions is a process which is followed by the judges to take the decision. In judicial precedent, the decision is taken by following the similar cases decided in the past, and the decision is based upon the principle of stare decisis, that is, stand by the decision already made. I'll give you one example. Supreme Court has decided that practice of triple talaq is unconstitutional. Now, whenever this issue comes before any high court, any subordinate court, or even before the Supreme Court, all the courts in the country will follow the decision given by Supreme Court in Shaira Bano versus Union of India, where the practice of triple talaq was declared as unconstitutional. So, dear students, in true sense, what are precedents? A precedent is something that precedes or comes before. Suppose you are posted as judicial magistrate in the district Gautam Buddha Nagar, and in a case a plea is raised before you that the husband has already divorced his wife by way of triple talaq, both the parties are Muslim. So you have a precedent in front of you that Supreme Court has already said that practice of triple talaq is unconstitutional. So you have something beforehand which you are supposed to follow. The Supreme Court relies on precedents, that is, earlier laws or decisions that provide some example or rule to guide them in cases which they are going to decide. In other words, judicial precedent is a sort of practice statement, a statement given by the higher courts that practice of triple talaq is unconstitutional. The courts in the country have to practice this statement, have to follow this statement. Dear students, the original concept of judicial precedent starts with original precedent. because some or other court might have decided a particular case for the first time, like Shaira Bano versus Union of India. The Supreme Court for the first time decided that practice of triple talaq is unconstitutional. So this is an original precedent. An original precedent is where a judge must come to a decision without following a previous decision, as the facts of the case have not come before the court earlier. This is for the first time that the matter of triple talaq reached Honorable Supreme Court, and for the first time, Supreme Court decided that practice of triple talaq is unconstitutional. So this judgment of Shaira Bano versus Union of India is an original precedent which has to be followed by all the courts within the territory of India. So dear students, where a court hears a case that involves a law or set of facts that have never come before the courts, then the outcome will create an original precedent that future judges will follow. And I may ask you a question at this moment, whether each and every court can create a precedent. There are so many courts in the hierarchy of courts in India. So whether every court can create a precedent? Probably the answer is no. Why? Generally, appellate courts like High Courts and Supreme Court create precedents. In England, the Crown Courts or the Court of Judicial Magistrate cannot create judicial precedents. In India also, the Court of Civil Judge Junior Division, Civil Judge Senior Division, Judicial Magistrate, Additional Chief Judicial Magistrates, Chief Judicial Magistrates, Assistant Session Judges, Additional District and Session Judges, and even the Court of District and Session Judges cannot create judicial precedents. Dear students, whenever a judgment is pronounced by a court, there are two parts of a judgment. And they are, number one, ratio decidendi, and second is obiter dictum. Please do not be afraid of regarding pronunciation of these terms. These terms are Latin terms. Two parts of a judgment, ratio decidendi and obiter dictum. And the portion of the judgment which is binding on lower courts is the ratio decidendi of the case. Today in this lecture, we will try to learn what is ratio decidendi, how to find out ratio decidendi of a case, and what is obiter dictum. And we will see that only ratio decidendi part of the judgment makes the judicial precedent which is binding on the future courts. If we talk about the hierarchy of courts in India, the Supreme Court is the highest authority in India, and its decisions are binding on all other courts. Article 141 of Constitution of India says that the law declared by the Supreme Court shall be binding on all the courts within the territory of India. But dear students, what is a law in a judgment? Suppose judgment continues in 700 pages. So which portion of those 700 pages long judgment, which portion is the law? Is it the whole judgment? No. It is only the ratio decidendi part of the judgment which forms the law for the future. Now the $1,000,000 question is, what is the ratio decidendi of a case? Ratio decidendi means the reason or the rationale for the decision. Or in other words, ratio decidendi is the point in a case that determines the judgment or the principle that case establishes. And dear students, when a ratio decidendi of a case is consistently followed by the future courts, according to the doctrine of stare decisis, it gives rise to law. This is in consonance with the spirit of Article 141 of Constitution of India. Now I'll tell you what is the rationale behind judicial precedents as to why judicial precedents should be binding on future courts. Let us take an example. If in a past decided case A, the facts were fact number 1, 2, 3, and 4. And on the basis of these facts, applying the relevant law, a judgment X was pronounced by the court. Now, according to doctrine of judicial precedent, if there is a current case B, a new case is before the court, whose facts are also like fact number 1, 2, 3, and 4. So the doctrine of judicial precedent says that now, since the facts are similar, judgment X should be pronounced. Judgment X should be pronounced because the facts of the current case are very much similar to a case decided in the past. The doctrine of stare decisis is inherent in this doctrine of judicial precedent. Stare decisis, stare means stare back at the decided case and decide the present case. हिंदी में बोले तो stare means एक टक देखना and decisis means the decision. आप पुराने जजमेंट को एक टक देखिए. And in English, stare means to look at the judgment for a long time. See that judgment carefully. उस जजमेंट को ध्यान से पढ़िए, ध्यान से देखिए. Stare at it very carefully as to what the judgment says, or to look fixedly and intently, often with open eyes. Keep your eyes open, look at the judgment carefully, stare it regularly. I think this term is not very much clear to you. That's why I have jotted the synonym words for stare also. The synonym of stare are gaze. Gaze the judgment carefully. Glare the judgment carefully. Inspect the judgment carefully. Look at the judgment carefully. Focus at the previous judgment carefully. Observe the previous judgment carefully. Or give a fixed gaze to the judgment. Dear students, if the meaning of stare is still not clear, I have jotted down the antonym of stare also. इसका उल्टा क्या होगा? The antonym of stare are ignore. Ignore the judgment. Overlook it. Misunderstood it. Or disregard the judgment. These words are opposite of the word stare. And what is decisis? Decisis in Hindi means निर्णायक और निर्णीतानुसरण. निर्णीतानुसरण, जो निर्णय हो चुका है उसका अनुसरण करना है, फॉलो करना है, उसको निर्णायक मानते हुए, फाइनल मानते हुए निर्णीतानुसरण, उस निर्णय का अनुसरण करना है. You have to follow that judgment. So dear students, the doctrine of stare decisis ensures that cases with similar scenario and facts are approached and decided in the same way. Simply put, in common language, this doctrine of stare decisis binds the court to follow legal precedents set by the previous decisions. Stare decisis, as I told you, is a Latin term again, which means to stand by that which is decided, or let the decision stand. If Supreme Court has said that practice of triple talaq is unconstitutional, then stare decisis says to stand by this decision of the Supreme Court, or let the decision of Supreme Court stand as it is. This is the meaning of stare decisis. Stare decisis is a doctrine of judicial precedents. Courts cite to stare decisis when an issue has been previously brought to the court and a ruling already issued. I gave you the example. The practice of triple talaq is unconstitutional, decided by the Supreme Court in Shaira Bano versus Union of India. It will be a judicial precedent for future. Whenever the issue of validity of triple talaq will come before the courts. Again, stare decisis is an important principle for certainty and finality of the law. Suppose Supreme Court has said that triple talaq is unconstitutional. Now Bombay High Court might decide that no, it is constitutional, it is valid. Allahabad High Court may say something. So doctrine of stare decisis prohibits different judgments from different courts when there is a judgment given by the Supreme Court. So for maintaining certainty and finality of the law, the doctrine of stare decisis is very important. And as I told you in the beginning of this lecture, that doctrine of stare decisis is embodied in Article 141 of Constitution of India. In short, it provides that the law declared by the Supreme Court shall be binding on all courts within the territory of India. According to this doctrine, the courts are obliged to uphold their previous rulings or rulings made by the higher courts within the same court system or hierarchy of the courts. Now the question is whether this stare decisis can be overturned or not. Or is it final forever for times to come? Yes, it can be overturned. It is possible. This doctrine of stare decisis, dating back to English common law, that courts should follow the precedents set by the past cases, is not universal, inexorable command. No, it can be overturned if it sets a wrong or bad precedent. There are several instances where Supreme Court has reversed its own judgment. They have overturned the doctrine of stare decisis also. You see the old example, the ratio decidendi of Shankar Prasad's case and Sajjan Singh's case. They were overturned in Golaknath versus State of Punjab. All these cases are relating to right to property. And similarly, later on, the ratio decidendi of Golaknath versus State of Punjab was again overturned in Keshavanand Bharati versus State of Kerala. So, precedents which are not suitable to the interest of society, or if they are bad precedents, they are liable to be changed. Hence, I can say that stare decisis can be overturned. Yes, it can be overturned. I would like to quote one paragraph which Honorable Supreme Court has written in Sajjan Singh's case at AIR 1965, Supreme Court, page 855. What Honorable Supreme Court has said, I am reading for your benefit. We would be prepared to review our earlier decisions in the interest of public good. The doctrine of stare decisis may not strictly apply to this extent. I have made this line in italics. The doctrine of stare decisis may not strictly apply to this extent, and no one can dispute the position that the said doctrine should not be permitted to perpetuate erroneous decisions pronounced by this court to the detriment of general welfare. This observation of the Supreme Court shows that stare decisis can be overturned. And dear students, as you have seen the language of Article 141, that law declared by the Supreme Court shall be binding on all the courts within the territory of India. All the courts. But this word, all the courts, does not include the Supreme Court. Because Supreme Court is not bound by its own decisions and may overturn its previous decisions, as held in Bengal Immunity Company versus State of Bihar leading case, that Supreme Court is not bound by its own decision. Why? If Supreme Court was bound by its own decisions, then how they could have changed the bad precedents? How they could have overruled previous decisions? That's very important. Hence, word all the courts do not include the word Supreme Court. And Supreme Court is not bound by its own decisions. Now, the next question which I am posing before you, dear students, is: can stare decisis influence judges? Suppose a judgment is pronounced by the Supreme Court. Take the example of Keshwanand Bharti versus State of Kerala. The ratio is that Parliament has power to amend each and every part of our Constitution, including parts related to fundamental rights, but the basic feature of the Constitution cannot be amended. This is the ratio decidendi of Keshwanand Bharti versus State of Kerala. Now the question I'm putting to you is, can stare decisis influence the judges? Whether this judgment of Keshwanand Bharti will influence the future judges? Whether judgment of the Supreme Court that triple talaq is unconstitutional can influence the future judges? What is your answer? Yes. This doctrine of stare decisis is meant to influence the judges. They refer to prior decisions in their current judgments. The judges apply precedents to current cases and rule based upon past decisions. The judges are more likely to strike down laws and policies as unconstitutional while following the doctrine of stare decisis. If a new law or a new judgment is not in consonance with the past established judicial precedents, then courts have power to declare such a law or policies as unconstitutional while following the doctrine of stare decisis. Now, dear students, we have understood to some extent, I'll repeat it also, as to what is ratio decidendi. Now, the remaining part of the judgment, which is not law, is known as obiter dicta. This doctrine of obiter dicta is also known as obiter dictum, and it refers to judges' comment or observation in passing on a matter arising in a case before him, which does not require a decision. Obiter remarks are not essential to a decision, and they do not create a binding precedent. Suppose during the course of writing a judgment, the judges have given certain quotations from books of some good author. Suppose Swami Vivekananda's quote is quoted in the judgment itself, or a quotation from Nehruji's book is quoted in the judgment. Or sometimes judges start writing, let us compare the legal position with United States. But all these things, dear students, were not essential for the decision of the case. Quotation of Swami Vivekananda, quotation from Nehru's book, and quoting the law in the United States was not at all essential for the judgment. So all these things said by way of illustrations, they constitute obiter dicta. And obiter dictas are not binding on the lower courts. But a care has to be taken that obiter dicta of Supreme Court are binding on all the courts, including the high courts. Now, dear students, you can distinguish obiter dicta of a case by asking this question to yourself. I am not asking you, ask this question to yourself. The question is whether the proposition supports or relates to the holding of a case. If it makes a point other than rule of the case, then it's probably an obiter dicta. Like I gave you illustration that in a judgment, the Supreme Court has quoted a quote from Vivekananda. Was it necessary to decide the case? No. Court has quoted a quotation from Nehruji's book. Was it necessary for deciding a case? No. Court has compared the American law and English law in the judgment. Was English law or American law, was it essential for the just decision of the case? No. So all these observations are known as obiter dicta, and they are not binding on the lower courts. They do not constitute rule of law. Obiter dictum is a Latin phrase, I told you, which means that which is said by passing reference. Writing the quotation of Swami Vivekananda or Nehruji, or referring to English law or referring to American law was a passing reference or an incidental statement. And it refers to a passage in a judicial opinion which is not necessary for the decision of the case before the court. Supreme Court could have decided the case even without reference to the quotation of Swami Vivekananda. They could have decided the case without mentioning the quotation from Nehruji's book. They could have decided the case without referring to English law. They could have decided the case without reference to American law. But still they have written it in the judgment, and the judgment went long into 500, 600 pages. But all these portions are known as obiter dictum. It is said by the judge while giving a judgment that was not essential to the decision in the case. It does not form part of ratio decidendi of the case and therefore creates no binding precedent. But it may be cited as persuasive authority in later cases. Obiter dicta may have persuasive authority in later cases. And there are examples when obiter dicta of a previous case becomes ratio decidendi in future cases. So it's not altogether a waste idea or waste writing by the court. It has definitely persuasive value for future cases also. So dear students, with this much background in the mind as to what is law, what are the sources of law, we have referred to judicial precedent as a source of law, judgment as a source of law, judgment of the superior courts, higher courts as a source of law. And we have also seen in this introduction that judgment has two parts, ratio decidendi and obiter dictum. Now, dear students, it is equally important for you how to read a case. Suppose you are going to read the leading case of Keshwanand Bharti versus State of Kerala. It is 703 pages long judgment, and I think it will take at least 10 days for you, 15 days for you to read this judgment. And then can you write such a long judgment in your answer in the examination hall when you get only half an hour to answer the question? So dear students, you have to read this case in such a manner so as to sort out maximum 5 to 7 relevant lines or the ratio decidendi of a case which you can write in the examination. In the examination, you can refer to the case of Keshwanand Bharti versus State of Kerala, and you may write down that it was held by the Supreme Court. In this case, that Parliament has power to amend each and every part of the Constitution, including the fundamental rights, but the basic structure of the Constitution of India cannot be amended. So this ratio you will have to extract from those 700 long pages. You will have to condense the judgment, extract the ratio decidendi of the case, and write it in the examination hall. I'll be taking very simple illustration how to find out the ratio decidendi of a case. Jurisprudential theories are there. Womburg test is there. Goodhart test is there. How to find out the ratio of a case. But I will take a very simple illustration from law of contract. All of you must have read this leading case of Satyabrat Ghosh versus Mugniram Bangur and Company Limited. First of all, I'll tell you the brief facts of this case. The facts of the case are that Mugniram Bangur and Company Limited is a defendant company in this case. They entered into a contract to sell a plot of land to plaintiff Satyabrat Ghosh, and date of agreement is 5th August 1940 in Lake Colony scheme, and they received a sum of rupees 101 as earnest money, meaning thereby that Mugniram Bangur and Company Limited is a builder company, as you witness builders in NCR area. So they executed an agreement to sell a particular plot of land to Satyabrat Ghosh on 5th August 1940, and an advance money of rupees 101 was received by the company. And final sale deed was to be executed within 1 month of completion of roads on payment of balance sale consideration. As you know, when a colony is to be developed, the roads and drains are constructed by the builder. So in this case also, the final sale deed was to be executed within 1 month of completion of roads on payment of balance sale consideration. Now the land which was to be sold was requisitioned by government for military purposes because Second World War was already on. All of you know that Second World War started on 1st September 1939 and it ended on 2nd September 1945. It continued for long 6 years. And see, the date of agreement is 5th August 1940. That means that agreement to sell was entered into between the parties when the Second World War was already on. Now, when the World War was over, the company refused to execute the sale deed in favor of the plaintiff. But the plaintiff Satyabrat Ghosh pleaded that contract was still subsisting and he was entitled to get a deed of conveyance, that is sale deed, executed in his favor. But the company pleaded that contract stood discharged by frustration, by supervening event like war and requisition of the land to be sold. Company says that contract has been frustrated in accordance with section 56 of Indian Contract Act, They are taking the plea of frustration. And as you know, if a contract gets frustrated, it becomes void. So company is also taking this plea that the contract stood discharged. They are no more liable to execute the sale deed. Why? Because the contract between the parties has frustrated by supervening event like war and requisition of land which was to be sold to the plaintiff Satyabrat Ghosh. Now here are four decisions in nutshell given by the four courts in the hierarchy of court. First of all, the trial court decreed the suit of the plaintiff and directed the defendant company to execute sale deed in favor of plaintiff. Now the company, since they lost the case in the trial court, they filed first appeal before the court of district judge. Their first appeal was also dismissed and the judgment of the trial court was upheld. Now the company went in second appeal before the High Court. The High Court allowed the second appeal and dismissed the suit on the ground that contract was frustrated because of requisition order issued by the government. Now the plaintiff went to the Supreme Court. Satyabrat Ghosh filed an appeal before the Supreme Court. The appeal of the Satyabrat Ghosh was allowed and suit was again decreed. So dear students, you have four judgments before you relating to one case. Now I am asking you a question. Which judgment is responsible for making a judicial precedent? Is it the judgment of trial court? Or is it the judgment of first or second appellate court? Or is it the judgment given by the apex court, which is responsible for making a judicial precedent? So dear students, the answer is very simple, that it is the highest court whose judgment will give rise to a judicial precedent. According to doctrine of merger, all the four judgments will merge into one. And whatever is decided by the highest court will be executed. And the judicial precedent will also emanate from the judgment of the highest court, that is Supreme Court. What was held by the Supreme Court? Let's see the judgment of the Supreme Court in a bit detail. It was held by the Supreme Court that most material thing was that there was no time limit within which roads and drains were to be constructed. It was mentioned in the contract between the parties that sale deed will be executed within 1 month of construction of roads and drains. But no time limit was fixed within which roads and drains were to be constructed. Secondly, so far as the effect of Second World War is concerned, war was already going on when the parties entered into contract. I gave you the dates. The parties entered into this agreement to sell when the World War was already on. So war can have no impact so far as the doctrine of frustration is concerned. And the third reason, the requisition order for military purposes was of a temporary nature. And it does not affect the fundamental basis upon which the agreement rested or struck at the root of the adventure. So Supreme Court held that the contract was not frustrated at all and the company was bound to sell the plot to the plaintiff. I told you, dear students, the merger of decisions of the courts, or in other words, the doctrine of merger. You have four judgments before you, four decrees before you. All the four judgments and operative part of the decrees consequently prepared will merge into one. The judgment of the highest court will prevail and the judgments of lower courts will get merged in the judgment of the Supreme Court. So whatever is said by the Supreme Court is final. Now this decision of Satyabrat Ghosh has to be seen from two aspects. Number one, what the case has decided between the plaintiff and defendant. क्या तय हुआ? तय ये हुआ that the company has to execute the sale deed in favor of Mr. Satyabrat Ghosh. And number two, what principle of law it has laid down. Principle of law क्या बना? Ratio decidendi of the case क्या है? So this case has decided that suit of plaintiff for specific performance of sale of plot of land was decreed because the case has been heard and all appeals have been taken off, or the time for filing appeal has elapsed. So this matter has been decided up to Supreme Court. All the parties to the dispute and their successors are bound by the court's finding on all the issues raised between the parties and on question of facts and law necessary to the decision of such dispute. So in Satyabrat Ghosh, whatever judgment is given by the Supreme Court is binding on the parties and their successors. Now the things which are decided between the parties, they are now res judicata. Things already decided between Satyabrat Ghosh and the company. And they cannot be subject of further dispute. But the court's finding will not be conclusive except as between Satyabrat Ghosh and company. Because the judgment is a judgment in personam, judgment between the two parties. Only in certain circumstances, such findings may also be binding on third parties if the judgment is judgment in rem, which is binding as against the whole world. According to Indian Evidence Act, there are only 4 categories of judgments which are judgment in rem: probate, matrimonial, admiralty, and insolvency. These 4 judgments are judgment in rem, which are binding not only on the parties but against the whole world also. Now you have seen that this judgment given by the Supreme Court that company is bound to execute the sale deed in favor of Mr. Satyabrat Ghosh is binding on Satyabrat Ghosh as well as on the opposite party, that is Mugni Ram Bangur and Company Limited. But as against the persons who are not parties to the suit, the only part of the judgment which is conclusive is the general rule of law for which the decision is the authority. The fruits of the judgment will be enjoyed by the Satyabrat Ghosh and the opposite party. But so far as the third parties are concerned, what is binding on third parties? On third parties, only that part of the judgment is conclusive, which is the general rule of law for which decision is authority. Now, dear students, in this case, it was decided that a requisition order was a temporary event. Occupation of the land by military forces was removed, and this does not frustrate the contract between the parties, and the suit of the plaintiff was decreed, and company was bound to sell particular plot number to Satyabrat Ghosh. Dear students, please read this case carefully from AIR and other journals, because in law journals, the editor of the journal prepares a head note, and head note is not always the mind of the judges. Head note, truly speaking, is the mind of the editor. But head note is not necessarily the ratio decidendi of the case. They have prepared a summary of the judgment, no doubt. If you will compare the head note of this leading case, you will find that editor has written that contract gets frustrated due to declaration of war. Whereas if you read the judgment in between the lines, if you find out the ratio decidendi of the case, then the ratio decidendi says that war is not such an event which frustrates the contract. Two reasons. War was already on when the contract was executed. Later on, war was over in 1945. Military tambus were removed from that area. The plot was open and in possession of the company once again. No time limit was fixed for construction of roads and drains. So now Supreme Court said that after the war is over, requisition order is taken back. Now what is the problem with the company to construct the roads and drains and execute the sale deed in favor of plaintiff within 1 month? So dear students, this rule of law is known as ratio decidendi. That is the proposition applied or acted upon by the court or regarded as binding by the court. So the judgment of High Court was reversed by the Supreme Court. See, Honorable High Court also committed a mistake that because of requisition order, the contract got frustrated. Because declaration of Second World War, the contract got frustrated. No. Supreme Court said that requisition order was temporary. It has been taken back. Second World War was over. And thirdly, the parties entered into an agreement when Second World War was going on. So there is no frustrating event. This is the turning point. This is the ratio decidendi of the case. When legal provisions are being applied to the particular facts of the case and decision is taken by the court. That part of the judgment, giving the reasons, is known as ratio decidendi of the case. And remaining part, as I told you, is known as obiter dicta. I would like to elaborate these two concepts a little more. Suppose while writing a judgment, a judge illustrates his reasoning by reference to some hypothetical situation and considers the law applicable to those situations. Or suppose the judge decides a case on one ground only and then gives his decision on other grounds. So strictly speaking, hypothetical illustrations or hypothetical situations neither arise before the court, nor in the second case, having arrived at a decision on one ground, the court has any cause to travel to other grounds if they are needless for the decision. So all these hypothetical situations, different grounds on which the judgment is not based, are part of obiter dicta. All these observations are known as obiter dicta. That is, observations by the way, and they are not binding. So dear students, the ratio decidendi is a rule acted upon by the court, whereas obiter dicta is suggestive of the trend of the thinking of the court. Now we come back to our initial question as to how to find out the ratio decidendi of a case. The first test to find out the ratio decidendi of the case is reversal test. It is also known as Wormbaugh's test, since it was given by jurisprudential author Wormbaugh. According to this test, we should take the proposition of law put forward by the judge and then reverse it or negate it by putting the English word not in that paragraph, and then see if its reversal would alter the actual situation and judgment. If yes, if by addition of word not, the judgment gets reversed, then that proposition of law is the ratio or part of it. And if the reversal makes no difference, then such a proposition is not the ratio decidendi of the case. Now let us apply this test to Satyabrat Ghosh's case. If we apply reversal test to Satyabrat Ghosh, what will happen? See the paragraph. The requisition order was not a temporary one. Original judgment says that requisition order was a temporary one. I have added the word not. The requisition order was not a temporary one, and occupation of military forces was not removed. Original paragraph says that occupation of military forces was removed. I have added the word not. Hence, the contract between the parties got frustrated. Because why it is frustrated? Because requisition order, by putting the word not, is not a temporary one. Military forces are still there. Hence, the contract between the parties got frustrated and became void, and the company cannot be compelled to execute the sale deed of plot of land in favor of the plaintiff. Now see, the entire judgment has been reversed. The Supreme Court has decreed the suit of the plaintiff, but by applying the word not in that particular paragraph, the contract stands frustrated and the suit of the plaintiff stands dismissed. So this reversal test shows that this proposition of law was a ratio decidendi of the case, because a reversal by addition of word not has completely altered the actual situation and the judgment. So this particular paragraph is the ratio decidendi of the case, which says that requisition order was a temporary one and occupation of military forces were removed from the plot in question. Hence, the contract between the parties still subsisted and it does not become void because of doctrine of frustration, and company is bound to execute the sale deed in favor of the plaintiff. This paragraph becomes the ratio decidendi of the case, because when we added the word not, कुछ नहीं करना है, अंग्रेजी का खेल है, वर्ड नॉट लगा दीजिए, हर पैराग्राफ में लगा दीजिए, और जिस पैराग्राफ में नॉट लगाने से फाइनल जजमेंट रिवर्स हो जाए, that paragraph is the ratio decidendi of the case. Second test to find out the ratio decidendi of a case is material fact test. This test was given by, again, jurisprudential author Mr. Goodhart. It is also known as Goodhart test. According to this test, we will have to find out the most material facts which the judges consider as material and their decision on them. You see, suppose there are 80 paragraphs in the judgment. So which paragraph contains the most material fact of the case? And on that most material fact, what was the decision of the case? That will be the ratio decidendi of the case. According to this test, only those propositions of law are only authoritative insofar as they are relevant to the fact in issue in a case. Obviously, the material facts are bound to be facts in issue or relevant to the fact in issue. In Satyabrat Ghosh's case, which illustration which I gave you, the most material fact and decision thereupon was that requisition order was a temporary one and occupation of military was removed, and as such it does not frustrate the contract. And the decision of the court on this issue amounts to ratio decidendi of the case, which is binding on all the subordinate courts. So most material fact is that requisition order was temporary and occupation of military was also removed. And what was the decision of the court? That because of these two factors, the contract subsists and it does not frustrate. So by application of Bombach test and by application of Goodhart test, both ways the answer is same. Ratio decidendi of the case is same. And the ratio is that since the requisition order of the government was a temporary one, which was later on withdrawn at the close of the war, the military tamboos were removed from the plot in question. So there is no question of frustration of the contract. The contract still subsists. Hence, the suit of the plaintiff was decreed, and Mugniram Bangur and Company Limited, defendant company, was directed to execute sale deed in favor of plaintiff after construction of roads and drains. Sale deed is to be executed within 1 month. So, dear students, I am coming back to Article 141, that the law declared by the Supreme Court of India is binding on all the courts within the territory of India under Article 141 of Constitution of India. And we have also discussed that this word court, all the courts, does not include Supreme Court. This is a matter of interpretation done by the Supreme Court himself. That word, all the courts, do not include Supreme Court itself. And dear students, when we have learned how to find out the ratio decidendi of a case, this ratio decidendi of a case, when repeatedly followed by the courts, gives rise to a law which is known as judge-made law, according to doctrine of judicial precedents as given by very famous author Cardozo. Cardozo says that ratio decidendi of a case, when repeatedly followed by the courts, give rise to a law, and that is judge-made law as opposed to law made by the parliament through legislation. So according to Cardozo, he gave the doctrine of judicial precedent. He is the author of this doctrine. He says that when ratio decidendi of a case, when it is repeatedly followed by the future courts, it gives rise to a law which is known as judge-made law. We have regularly followed the ratio of Keshwanand Bharti's case, that basic structure of Constitution of India cannot be amended. In so many cases, this ratio has been followed. So the ratio decidendi of Keshwanand Bharti's case, by its repeated following by the future courts, including the Supreme Court itself, has given rise to a law, and the law is that basic structure of the Constitution cannot be amended. Thus, dear students, this judge-made law is a good source of law. We started our lecture from the legal methods. According to legal methods, we have 3 sources of law, and judge-made law is one of them. You see, in England, there is no written constitution, and the judge-made law is a chief source of law in England. Dear students, when I was running my Doon Law Institute coaching center at Dehradun, one of the students from Punjab, he was a Sikh gentleman. When I delivered this lecture in the class, in the end of the class, that Sikh gentleman student, he stood up, he was angry at me, he started crying. I asked him, क्या हुआ सरदार जी, क्या बात है? He says, मेरे को कुछ समझ नहीं आया, मैंने कुछ समझ नहीं आया, ये रेशो पेशो की डेंडी मैंने कुछ समझ नहीं आया. And he demanded refund of his fees from me in the class. मेरी फीस वापस कर दो जी, मैंने कुछ समझ नहीं आ रहा. I can't understand anything what you have delivered today. It was a challenge for me that my student is saying that this lecture delivered by me, he could not understand my lecture. I repeatedly asked that student as to which part of the lecture he could not understand. क्या कहना क्या चाहते? He said in Punjabi to me in the class itself amongst all other students कि जी गल्लां दा निचोड़ ये है कि मैनू कुछ भी समझ नहीं आया. The crux of the matter is that he could not understand a word of my lecture. मैं कहा सिद्धार्थ जी, stop here, stop. ये जो तुसी कह रहे हो ना गल्लां दा निचोड़, Galnadhar Nichod is known as ratio decidendi of the case. Then he started laughing. Then he sat down on the chair. So I am drawing inspiration from protest of my student कि गल्लां दा निचोड़ ये है कि मैंने कुछ समझ नहीं आया. I repeated that गल्लां दा निचोड़ means ratio decidendi of what you are saying. And in Hindi, ratio decidendi is also known as निर्णय सार. निर्णय का सार क्या है, काम की बात क्या है. 700 pages long judgment, लेकिन काम की बात सिर्फ इतनी है that basic structure of the constitution cannot be amended. काम की बात सिर्फ इतनी है that practice of triple talaq is unconstitutional. So dear students, ratio decidendi of a case is like invisible vitamins in lemon juice. When you drink lemon juice, there is vitamin C in it. Other vitamins are also there. So ratio decidendi is also an invisible vitamin in lemon juice. You cannot see ratio decidendi unless you read whole of the judgment in between the lines. You will have to carefully stare at the judgment, gaze at the judgment, give a fixed look to the judgment repeatedly to find out that vitamin which is not visible to you in lemon juice. So ratio is like invisible vitamin C or other vitamins in your lemon juice. Now, dear students, before I stop, I would like to tell you, which may be a new thing for you, that in judicial precedent, judges are using the principle of syllogism. What is syllogism? Word syllogism is derived from Greek word syllogismos. Syllogismos means conclusion or inference. Judges are always using this methodology while writing a judgment. Syllogism means deductive reasoning. This word is a noun and an instance of a form of reasoning in which a conclusion is drawn from two given or assumed propositions or premises. And you may find such questions in your prelims also, in your GK part also, where your reasoning is tested. And your students, in this kind of exercise, a common or middle term is present in the two premises, but not in the conclusion, which may be invalid. I'll illustrate you. What is this? Syllogism. Suppose the question is, for example, A statement is all dogs are animals. Fine, all dogs are animals. B, all animals have 4 legs. Okay, therefore, all dogs have 4 legs. This is deductive reasoning. I'll illustrate you further. Syllogism is a form of arguing in which two statements are used to prove a third statement which is true. Again, an example of syllogism is before you. All humans are mortals. Statement number 1. Statement number 2, I am a human. Therefore, I am mortal. Again, one more example to make it clear. All mammals are animals. This is one statement. More general premise is major premise. This is major premise that all mammals are animals. Second, all elephants are mammals. This is more specific premise. It is a minor premise. And the conclusion therefore is that all elephants are animals. So syllogism in logic is a valid deductive argument having two premises and a conclusion. One premise is more general, which is major premise, and second one is more specific, which is minor premise. And you draw a conclusion from these two premises. So while writing a judgment as a judge, you will also use this logic while writing a judgment, where you will draw a conclusion from a more general premise, that is major premise, and more specific premise, that is a minor premise. Now let us apply this syllogism in our illustration of Satyavrat Ghosh versus Mugni Ram Bangur and Company Limited. So there are 3 items, 2 premises and 1 conclusion. Premise number 1 is, in all cases, wherever the specific performance of a contract is denied due to temporary requisition of land by the government, the legal consequence will be that the legal consequence will be that requisition order is a temporary event and it does not frustrate the contract. This is the major premise. Second, in future cases, if facts are that specific performance of contract is denied due to temporary requisition of land by the order of the government, then conclusion will be, therefore, the legal consequence will be that requisition order was a temporary one and it does not frustrate the contract. This view of judicial reasoning is known as syllogism. Syllogism in Hindi means yukti vakya. युक्ति वाक्य या न्याय वाक्य या अनुमान वाक्य. आपने 2 प्रीमाइसेस से ये अनुमान लगाया, ये कंक्लूजन निकाला. क्या कंक्लूजन निकाला? That requisition order made by the government was temporary one and it does not frustrate the contract. और मेजर प्रीमाइस आपके सामने क्या था? Major premise was number 1, I am repeating it. In all cases, wherever the specific performance of a contract is denied due to temporary requisition of land by the government, the legal consequence will be that requisition order is a temporary event and it does not frustrate the contract. This is our major premise. Minor premise is, if the facts are that the specific performance of the contract is denied due to temporary requisition of land by the order of the government, then the conclusion or the legal consequence will be that requisition order was a temporary one and it does not frustrate the contract. This is the process of syllogism being used as deductive reasoning while writing a judgment. If I may conclude, dear students, it is submitted that the ratio decidendi is the underlying principle, namely the general reasons or the general grounds upon which the decision is based on the test or abstract from specific peculiarities of a particular case which gives rise to decision. And I am repeating what I have illustrated with the help of syllogism, that the ratio decidendi has to be ascertained by an analysis of facts of the case and the process of reasoning involving major premise consisting of a pre-existing rule of law, either statutory or judge-made, and a minor premise consisting of the material facts of the case under immediate consideration. So when you apply the principle of syllogism to the major premise and minor premise, you deduct a conclusion, and that conclusion is the following the ratio of the previous cases, which gives rise to law according to the doctrine of judicial precedent as propounded by Mr. Cardozo. So dear students, let me conclude the discussion of theory of judicial precedents. Every decision, every judgment contains 3 basic ingredients. Number 1, finding of material facts, which may be direct or inferential. Second, statement of principle of law applicable to the legal problem disclosed by the facts. And third, the judgment based on combined effect of first and second propositions. And dear students, for the parties to the litigation, ingredient 3 is important because it finally determines their rights and liabilities. Judgment. For Satyavrat Ghosh, only point number 3 is relevant. He got a judgment. His suit was decreed for specific performance of the contract. But for the purposes of doctrine of judicial precedent, Ingredient number second is the vital element in the decision. Second is statement of principle of law applicable to the legal problems disclosed by the facts. So point number 3, ingredient number 3 is relevant for the parties, and ingredient number 2 is relevant for the doctrine of judicial precedent for finding out the ratio decidendi of the case. So that is the ratio decidendi, which may finally be defined as statement of law applied to the legal problem raised by the facts as found upon which the decision is based. And two other elements are not ratio decidendi of the case. It is only the second point, which is the ratio decidendi of the case. Now, dear students, when I delivered this lecture last time, a year before, few students asked me a question, sir, where is the proof of judge-made law in India? Give us the proof that judges do make law. Yes, it was a challenge for me. Again, I explained to my students that please go through the leading cases from legal journals, but mind the head note prepared by the editor. The head notes prepared by the editor are not always the ratio of the case. You will have to read the mind of the judges to find out the ratio decidendi of the case. If you see the head note of Satyabrat Ghosh, it reads, doctrine of frustration, dash, the contract frustrates due to declaration of war. And just now we have seen that this is not the ratio of the case. It was decided by the Supreme Court that contract does not frustrate because the war was already on and the requisition order of the land was also a temporary one. So this is the proof that judges have made the law in Satyabrat Ghosh versus Mugni Ram Bangur and Company Limited. Take another example, Savitri versus Govind Singh Rawat. This was a breakthrough judgment of the Supreme Court, awarding interim maintenance to the ladies during pendency of application for maintenance under section 125. Later on, CRPC was amended and provision for interim maintenance was inserted in section 125 CRPC. This is a pakka proof that judges are making law. Judges made a law that if the decision on application under section 125 is taking a long time, the ladies are entitled to interim maintenance. This is proof of judge-made law. I illustrated Keshwanand Bharati's judgment before you. The word basic feature is nowhere defined in our constitution. This is a judge-made law. That basic feature of our constitution cannot be amended. This is proof of judge-made law. Then another important judgment on criminal law side was Hussain Ara Khatun versus Home Secretary Bihar, wherein it was held that an under trial who is in jail for a period more than the maximum term imposable on him on conviction should be released from jail. Suppose a person is in jail for offense of theft. 3 years is the maximum penalty for theft. And he is in jail for more than 3 years and his trial is not concluded. Such a person should be released on bail. Later on, CRPC was amended and above mentioned judge-made law was inserted in the shape of section 436 capital A of CRPC. And then CRPC was further amended and it was inserted that where a person has, during the period of investigation, inquiry or trial of an offense under any law, not being an offense which the punishment of death has been specified as one of the punishment under that law, and such person has undergone detention for a period extending up to 1/2 of the maximum period of imprisonment specified for that offense under that law, he shall be released by the court on his personal bond with or without sureties. Initial judgment law was कि अगर accused ने जेल में इतना पीरियड spent किया है which is more than the maximum fixed penalty for the offense, he should be released on bail. This was judgment law. Later on, it was said that if an under trial person has undergone 1/2 of the maximum period of imprisonment, then he should also be released on bail. And CRPC was amended. And dear students, the Law Commission of India has recommended that this limitation of 1/2 should be reduced to 1/3. Meaning thereby, if an under trial accused has undergone 1/3 of its sentence, 1/3 of the total fixed, maximum penalty fixed, he is in jail, trial is not concluded, then he should be released on bail. This is another proof of judgment law. Then Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan is the greatest example once again. The guidelines issued by the Supreme Court for the protection of ladies from sexual harassment at workplace, directions were given by the Supreme Court in 1997. This is a proof of judgment law. And further proof is that Parliament enacted Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013. The judgment law was fortified by the Parliament into the shape of a legislation. Another example, D.K. Basu versus State of West Bengal. According to directions issued in this case relating to the rights of the arrestees and person in police custody, CRPC was amended by Indian Parliament. Again, a proof of judgment law. And finally, the leading case of Shaira Bano versus Union of India as before you, wherein the practice of triple talaq was declared unconstitutional. This is judgment law. Later on, triple talaq was made a punishable offense under the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Marriage Act 2019, wherein a penalty of 3 years was prescribed for triple talaq. And another judgment decided by the Supreme Court on 7 December 2017, the Supreme Court decided that a wife living separately from her husband under decree of judicial separation is also entitled to maintenance. And the reason given was that when a divorced wife can claim maintenance, there is no reason why a judicially separated wife is not entitled to maintenance under section 125. This is again a proof of judgment law, my dear students. When the Supreme Court says that a wife who is living separately from her husband under a decree of judicial separation under Hindu Marriage Act, she is also entitled to maintenance. This is proof of judgment law. And there are several other examples proving the existence of judgment law according to doctrine of judicial precedent as propounded by the jurisprudential author, Mr. Cardozo. So, dear students, we started with the concept of law, sources of law. Then we came to judicial precedent as a source of law. Then we see how much part of judgment is the law. We concluded that only ratio decidendi part of the judgment gives rise to law. Then we dwelled upon how to find out the ratio of a case. We applied Womburg test. We applied Goodhart test. We took the illustration of Satyabrat Ghosh versus Mugniram Bangur and Company Limited. And we have learned what is ratio decidendi of a case and how do you distinguish it from obiter dictum of a case. And at the same time, dear students, we also learned how to use the doctrine of syllogism, whereby deductive reasoning is to be applied while writing a judgment. So, thank you very much, dear students.